believe Eric is out today. It's too early in the morning. Are we expecting anyone else? Got Harry, Gary. Okay. We should review the minutes and then open it up for public comment, or comment first?
Comment first.
All right, I'm just pulling up the agenda. Sorry, I've been in non-stop motion for the last 2 weeks. All right, so pull up the agenda.
Hopefully I got better because I got no charger. Okay.
So if I could give like a 5-minute update on Catamount Community Forest. I know I'm not public, but it was some either now or later on in the agenda.
Oh, sure. Great. Yeah, I don't see any other public comments, so go for it, Terry. Thanks.
Great. So Gary started it off with with about the tree planting at Catamount, and I didn't know about it till like last week or the week before. People were asking me what all those colored flags were for out in the area that was the forest management happened. And so then Ethan put me into a thread of the crew that was doing the planting. So they've been out there, I don't know, 4 times, 5 times, both at Catamount and at Talcott, planting all these different species of trees. And it's the UVM, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, the Adaptive Silviculture Climate Change Project. Is that what it's called? Yeah, so anyway, so it's finally happening, and Gary said they're almost done, which is great, and the chestnuts, which is really exciting, those are planted. And then another thing that the Catamount Community Forest Committee have been working on is, with Ethan, he suggested that we really get serious about the invasives over there and have a management plan. So he wrote up a proposal to take some money out of the stewardship fund to have Bob Hames, who has done some invasive control over there, to write up a management plan for the whole parcel, but really focusing on the north side. And so that is almost, I guess, soon to be looked at by the select board and hopefully approved. And then there's a group called Trout Lily Forestry who will actually do the work. Ethan's worked with them a lot, and they've done some work at Catamount. So we hope to start that. We kind of have to wait till breeding season is over to start up doing a lot of the invasive stuff over there. Let's see. And then the bobbling field was cut the very last day of the allowed time that he could go in there and mow. The bobolinks were back, but it was just the male bobolinks. Got it cut, and then we went the next week to do the monitoring, and we noticed that he had gone in and spread fertilizer, which is not okay with the lease agreement. So there were females back. They do start to claim their territory. So I sent Andrew an email, and I haven't heard back. Andrew, have you looked into that to find out why the farmer?
Yeah, I reached out to the farmer. I have not heard back yet.
Yeah.
I know that he had Simon's contact information, and I'm not sure if he has mine. I'm hoping that, I believe Simon's email now has a direct to me. But yeah.
What field was this, Terry?
What's that?
What field was that?
It's the bobbling field, but it's they call it the C field. It's way over near the River Hill farm side where, Genevieve Lane?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, where the coyote incident happened a few years ago. So that field over there is a delayed mode, and they can't get in there. They shouldn't be in there after May 20th. So they had mowed it, and this is typical. You mow, and then a few days later they go through and put a fertilizer on it. But he had gone past that date of May 20th. So But anyway, so we just need to make sure remind him of the lease agreement.
Terry, I assume it was a chemical fertilizer, like a spreading?
Yeah. Yeah, he does. I mean, we had him here at our house. He typically uses his manure on the cornfields,
Yeah,
and then all the hay fields are the chemical. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's been doing that every year, you know, and so now that field will not be cut till August 1st again. All the other fields will be mowed probably every 30 days. But then that one will be mowed in August, so. And so the other thing that happened, which was a bit of a surprise, is the neighboring field, River Hill, I guess the name of the farm is. They typically don't mow till like July or something, and we got there last week and they had mowed, which actually is a good thing because now Catamount's field actually looks a little more appealing to the bobolinks because it's taller. So we'll see what happens. And then the only other thing is we're going to do the committee had set up a few walks and talks, and hopefully, depending on the weather, tomorrow Laura is going to be leading a geology talk at Catamount.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that's my report, and I guess I would like to make a request that and this is, you know, in hindsight, I should have requested this a while ago, is, you know, to give an update to the Conservation Committee about Catamount, if not once a month, which they do at the Parks and Rec, but, you know, at least quarterly, to just keep you guys updated on what's going on. But that's it. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Let's go to the agenda. And we will review the minutes.
Seems like you worked on abbreviating a little bit.
Yeah, that's a little shorter.
That's a good idea.
Save yourself some work.
It's still really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Didn't look at the HGA contracting section closely enough. I'm giving that a closer read now.
I do wonder if on this point, we shouldn't capture that. We talked about a very specific location, off of, well, the Brennan Woods neighborhood, because it's got an access road right down to the water. By a pumping station.
And
And that is off of Barrett Lane.
I think it was you that said it too, right?
Yeah.
Um, Two teams, all right.
Yeah. That way, if we ever go back, we can at least see it, that it's there.
That's sufficient.
Great. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I think I have one other minor thing, which is 5.2. The end of the third line says the board discussed, you probably meant the commission discussed, yeah. Just in case somebody wonders
Yeah.
which board discussed
Oh,
it.
yeah. Good catch.
Approval as amended.
Second,
All right. All, I guess we'll do the vote. All in favor?
I,
Any abstentions?
I will, since I wasn't there.
Thanks, Terry. Okay, let's approve the minutes. And now we have continuation of our discussion from last week on the HDA contracting.
Yeah,
Give a quick recap if you'd like,
That'd be great.
pull up those notes.
it's important for us to get right. It's like. It's like the operational piece that we. That we do and rather than planning piece,
Mhm. Try not to make it frustrating for.
right?
Right. So yeah, a little bit of background. Last time we talked about what is in the bylaw and some points that I would just like the committee to discuss. We talked a little bit about the discretionary permit process and how this commission is involved. Kind of in that first two steps with pre-application and discretionary permit. We talked about the staff process for starting that HDA. Talking about reaching out to the applicant, and making it very clear to them from the start that that's a requirement. And we talked a little bit about fixed rate pricing for that. How I had gotten some feedback from a contractor on, how fixed rate pricing is a bit challenging to calculate. And we can continue that conversation if you all are interested. But the one other example I think I would use is talking about our engineering fees for public works. We can go into more detail if you want. But I think last time we kind of said, well, probably just leave it that way, which that's good feedback too. A little bit,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
I'm interested in what, how the engineering fees are set. I don't know if now's the time to go into it or we should.
yeah. The only other thing, just recapping, I think the last other thing we talked about was a site visit, or the staff being on site for the actual HDA, and there was some differing opinions there on what it should look like if the town is truly the one that's contracting the
Right.
biologist, or not biologist, but yeah. So I'll leave it there, and then actually this time, I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about the pricing, and it sounds like there's interest. And then also looking at how we have the feedback set up for mitigation measures and site design. I think it's interesting how HDA is finished, then the applicant may or may not make changes to their plan, and then it comes to us, and it's in that same timeline as going to the DRB. And so I guess to me, there seems like a bit of a, like, if they're going to make the changes, they've already made the changes before they come to the Conservation Commission. And that leaves us, if the commission wants to make a recommendation that it's changed, then that's leading the applicant towards a continuation of the DRB, or a recommendation that then goes to the DRB. And I'm not saying that doesn't make sense, but I'm just kind of wondering what you all think about that timeline, and what we do if, the commission feels that there should be a change and the applicant hasn't made that change. It's about, yeah, I've talked a little bit about making recommendations that actually have teeth and are grounded in the bylaw. And I just think it's important, so.
So I'm picking up on a couple of different topics that we want to get to today. Pricing, timeline, and what else? Or is pricing and timeline the main two?
those are the main two, looking back at the past discussion points too, if anyone else has any more comments about. Request for qualification, how we should have that, list of contractors or.
Okay. Okay, well, it sounds like we're knee deep in the contracting process between the state and contractors, so we're definitely in the weeds
Mhm.
on this. What would you recommend, or what do you want to tackle first? Is the timeline or the pricing sort of more valuable for input at this point?
Let's talk about pricing. I don't think that. I don't know how deep that conversation will be. But I can describe basically how our public works fees work. The engineering fees, and just see if that's something that anyone's
Yeah.
interested in.
Mhm.
I had some questions 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, so it's a little foggy, about whether or not we actually had contracts with these, HDAs or providers in, I don't, what should we call them, contractors?
Contractors, yeah,
I was a little unclear as to whether or not we were going out to scope with contracts where the town is actually paying, or we were pre-screening contractors and then the applicant is the one paying for the services directly. Seems to me like there's a pretty significant difference between, those two setups, so. Maybe we can actually start there in terms of establish, before we get into the actual pricing, because I just want to understand the nature of like, who does the contractor work for directly?
Right.
Because it's one thing if we sort of put 3 contractors on a list and say these 3 are approved, but you still have to write a personal check to have them do the work. It's a totally different thing to say, write a check to the town of Williston and one of our contractors will come over at
yeah,
an agreeable time.
so I can try to explain that, and if it's confusing, let me know, just stop me, but.
Oh, boy.
Basically, it is the latter of what you just said, which is, it is the town paying the contractor for the services. We get that money from the applicant, so the applicant is giving us money to then go to the contractor. The pre-approved list is, to me, it's a legitimacy thing, and so the process is. The applicant goes to pre-application. An HDA is required. They then come to the town and say, I'd like to do an HDA. And we say, okay, we'll reach out to some contractors and see if we can find one that's available. I go out and look for a contractor that's available. I get a quote for a fixed rate price on that project. Once I have quotes, I need at least 2.
Mhm.
I can then choose one of those contractors, and. I'll come back to that point, but I choose that contractor and I let the applicant know. This is the price for that HDA, please pay a check to the planning office. And we take that money. We put it in an escrow account. That is then drawn from as we pay the contractor, so we take the money. We execute a contract with the contractor. And that's where we're looking at all the requirements of the HDA and making sure that they understand what they need to deliver.
Mhm.
Once the contract is executed, the HDA is completed. Throughout that process, they're billing the town for the fees, and we're paying them out of that escrow account from the applicants.
So let me interrupt
Yeah,
for clarification. So you sign a new contract for every assessment that's done.
Correct.
How many assessments are done annually?
10, 15.
I would say less than that. I would say 3 to 8, maybe. I don't think there's been that many.
Right.
I guess there's some of these projects more than once, so it feels like it's more often.
Yeah.
But it's really not that many.
Yeah, in this spring, we've had. We've had 3 that are ongoing, 1 withdrew. So that's CSWD, Nob Hill, and Old Creamery. There were all HDAs that are ongoing. The one on Mountain View Road that we looked at the pre-application for was withdrawn. So for each of those, yes, there's a separate contract and with the contractor.
How long do those contracts generally take to implement it? Is it like a 1 day site visit or have they extended into multiple days or weeks?
To just execute the contract, or are you
No.
talking about
The work, the scope of work.
the work it's varied.
Okay.
The CSWD project, the way it was done, it was pretty much lined up. Working with CSWD, they were very quick to do it, and we got it done in a couple weeks. Nob Hill, I still haven't heard back from them. They were out there in February. And still, and that's also might be a symptom of there are other requirements for these permits. There may be other permits that the applicant's working on before they filed their discretionary permit.
So it's not that the habitat disturbance assessment hasn't been completed. Are you saying that the applicant has held off on doing it, or that the provider is?
Have you seen the assessment?
For Nob Hill,
Yeah. For
no,
example.
not the final report.
Huh. So that means the applicant hasn't received the final report either.
Theoretically.
Yes,
Huh. So any delay from that contractor to actually, like, they've been out, they did a site visit in February.
Mhm.
It's not like a 24 hour later next
No.
week, here's your report. Cause that would definitely be a point of frustration that, like, if you're trying to go to the next step, go to the DRB, come to us,
yeah,
you need that assessment, right?
right.
So do you call them?
Yeah, so you're on the hook for that, I guess, right?
Yes, theoretically, I mean,
Right.
and this is kind of where I think. The problem, one of the problems is that. I'm not sure, I can't keep track of the fact that the contractor is talking to the applicant. They may be coordinating on, because they're the ones out at the site. And so it's how we kind of formalize this process, and
Right.
I think that it being so new. And based on the fact that we have different contractors at different kind of levels. It's. A little bit murky.
Like, we can't tell an applicant how long it will take. We can only tell them once we start it, they will do these services and then they will get back to us with a report.
And that's another thing is that, yeah, depending on availability of contractors, they may say, sorry, we don't have any availability, or it might be 6 months. And so we can't tell an applicant for sure. Until we work with a contractor, and I mean, I think. In practice, the preference for choosing someone that's available, we're not trying to delay the applicant, but. Doesn't really matter what intent is if that's what happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's no like requirement in the contract today that says that you must provide an update within this amount of time, even if it's not complete, like you need to be in contact. Are there any requirements for the contractor timeline?
I think it depends on the contract. I know that, like, for example, that CSWD. They were really rushing, trying to get that done, and so it was, use that person that can do it right then.
Wow.
But
it was a different person clearly for Nob Hill. Yeah, see, what I don't think anyone on this commission would be interested in is sort of getting into the details of the individual contracts and how quickly or how delayed any one of these contracts are. Right, so like, I think that's a point of discussion among the commission, but I think we all just heard a couple examples of like the complexity of overseeing these contracts, right? Is that these are effectively town contracts. And projects will proceed at the pace at which the town can deliver on the services stipulated in the contracts. So that kind of puts the town in the middle of project as a result.
You know, we're not causing delays, right? Like, nobody's waiting on you to call and decide on bids and stuff. It's that like once we've selected a contractor, their timeline is unknown and we don't control it.
My point, I guess, is that contractors bail a lot these days.
Like sign up for stuff and then not deliver.
Yeah, or like, you know, they do like a quick walk around of the site and then they're like, this is too complicated and I'm not gonna, you know, I underbid, I'm just gonna walk away from it. If a contractor does that to a homeowner, that's their issue. If a contractor does that to the town, like, that's on them because they just got blacklisted basically from the town for future bids, but it's still kind of on the town to sort of figure out
Yeah.
what is the solution, right? Because you've got money in the escrow account.
Mhm.
Have we received any billing from that contractor from non?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked to them at a meeting. I think part of that HDA was them going out once things had grown in. But
That was the lady,
yeah, Patty,
Patty,
Right.
yeah,
yeah, she's,
so she had a
I
draft
thought it was the man.
report.
I thought it was the man.
He was the
He's the
owner.
homeowner.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Oh,
Patty
okay.
came and she walked through her draft.
Right,
It was the first one that we've had like this, and walked through it with us, answered some questions, and then said, yeah, I need to go back out once things have grown in to confirm my results before I
okay,
finalize. So she has written the report, we've seen the report, it's draft.
okay.
Needs some one more look, so
Mhm.
that's interesting that she hasn't finished.
Yeah, it's definitely growing season. All right,
The other thing that I think was interesting is that you gave the gentleman a list, right? And then he found somebody else that was cheaper.
Mhm.
So,
yeah,
There's that.
how does that work?
so I think that's a symptom of, that was pretty new and we kind of said, okay, that isn't unreasonable if she can deliver. I think that's where I'm going with having this request for qualifications, where we have our list and we
Yeah.
stand by it. And
Yeah,
it has some legitimacy
To
of,
build it up.
we've looked at these however many, hopefully more than 4 contractors.
yep,
You get to, basically, we're going to ask them when they're available, what their price is, and we are going to choose
Yeah.
mhm.
one of those. And in practice, I think Simon was letting the applicant kind of weigh in as well on, you know, like what they thought, but ultimately it is the town's decision. I don't really know if that's really beneficial.
right,
Yeah, I think the applicant's always gonna want the cheapest option
Mhm.
unless they say, I can't do it for 4 months, and they're like, that's not
Right.
acceptable.
yeah,
But the town would also say that's not.
Right.
We expect things to be able to move forward on a reasonable pace.
Yeah. Um,
okay, so that helps me understand what's going on here, at least a little bit more on the process wise. Are there any other questions right now on the commission of like what we're talking about? And then we can start getting into the pricing and this contract list.
If I may, I just wanted to confirm one thing on how it used to function, I think, is all the same things happened where like, okay, an HDA gets required because of the site plan. And then the only difference was the applicant was facing the challenges that we're facing now, which is I have to go out and find somebody who's available. Find somebody with a price that seems reasonable and then I have to follow up if that person is not delivering what I need in time for me to move toward discretionary permit. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah, they were all on their own.
There's all their own, yeah.
It was-
And I think they
part of
came
their-
to like Simon or Melinda in the past and said, hey. How do I do this? And we said,
Probably.
no worries, here are some contractors that have done many in the past. You can reach out to them, this is what you need to make sure to ask them. We kind of coached them through it, but we didn't do it.
Mhm.
Personally, I would say, and this is getting into the next topic you wanted to cover, which is. It would make sense to me for the town to have a pre-vetted list of contractors,
Mhm.
because. If you allow applicants to call around and find another. provider, you're kind of undermining the whole point of the system. The whole point of the system was to have these like half dozen contractors who are lined up and qualified and sort of more directly relationship to you.
Exactly.
So I mean, I think that's perfectly reasonable as to like, but it does mean more paperwork on your end, having be familiar with contracting process, that would essentially require the town to come out with an RFQ, request for qualifications, create that body of, you know, work and say, okay, we now have an official list, we're gonna update it every 2 years. But for the next 2 years, this is the list. And when we have a project, we're gonna send it out to bid for all 6 of you. And you know, that's the kind of process that you're describing, that you're requesting or sort of pushing for.
Mhm. Yeah, and I don't think it's clearly stated, but I do think that that was the intent, but I just,
we wanted to, the reason we changed the process was because we wanted to. Be able to rule out any potential bias as a result of the biologist working for. The person trying to develop.
Yeah.
And while you would expect a biologist to just do their job and say, well, this is what I see. We had never really had pushback from one of those reports saying, well, no, you really shouldn't cite the house there. That never came back. And so we were like, yeah, that's kind of suspicious. If it's never enough to be a significant impact, then what's going on here? Like that just doesn't seem logical. And so we're trying to remove that potential source of bias, but we're not trying to make the process longer. One thing I would like to suggest and see if there's feedback on is, it seems to me that if we do an RFQ or something, I would like to see some sort of expected timeline, like or checkpoints, like we need to receive something, whether it's a schedule of your planned visits or whatever it is by this many days after contract signing, so that we can give some level of expectations and we can decide to abandon that contract at that point and go with somebody else if they're not following the timeline. It's hard because different times a year, I know that the biologist's like, well, if it's November and I'm not able to see a lot, I'd really rather wait till the snowfall so I can see tracks or whatever it may be. There's certain times a year I like to do it, but it seems like there has to be some checkpoint on the ground.
That would be in the RFP process.
Would have to be in there.
Yeah, so if you just put qualifications out there.
That's right, that's just to figure out who's on the list.
Yeah, just who's on the list, because then.
Sorry, I meant RFP,
Yeah.
so when the RFP goes out, I'd like to see something in there that says. Within 60 days, you need to provide a schedule of visits, or something like that.
yeah, and there is the implication there too, the statutory shot clock that we have of having these applications in, because they have deadlines to keep those applications live. And we have deadlines to approve those applications, basically, once they're submitted.
Yeah, so it just seems like we needed some timeline commitments as part of the proposals. And I have questions about pricing, but we're.
Yeah, let's, so still on process here. Terry?
I just had one quick question. Do we have a list of what's expected from these assessments, like identifying wildlife corridors, identifying species that apparently use the area, that would be just a kind of a basic setup? Here's what we expect from the biologists. We expect you to investigate each of these 10 items or something. Do we have that, Andrew?
We do.
Okay, great. I figured we must, but I just want to be sure.
In the bylaw.
I'd say it should be listed in the bylaw, because we have to be able to, when we ask an applicant to do something, we have to be able to point to what it
Yeah,
is.
okay.
So this is the,
We need to zoom in for those of us on the big
Yeah,
monitor.
really. Okay, there we go.
so this is our section on procedures. And And this,
Okay, advertising.
what must be included?
Okay, this is great, yeah. So these are all,
Yeah, so I mean, an RFQ would essentially pre-screen any biologist to attest that in a future RFP, they would be able to assess a site for any one of those,
For all of them.
all
yeah.
of those indicators.
Right.
And then in the then the point of issue with the RFP, then when you've actually got a project that you want to bid, that want them to bid on, you're talking about a very specific parcel, the size, the scope. You're not actually, like, they're qualified because you've already approved them. And then you just get the price essentially and the timeline, which makes sense. I mean, I think that makes sense, but I'm not quite sure what you would need from the commission as far as like, if you want to institute the RFQ process to then sort of oversee it. Sounds like really what we're talking about is just, and I don't know if this is what you need from us to do this, but if you just want to say, we're not going to accept recommendations from applicants on the vendors.
Or they could recommend vendors, but they have to go through the next RFQ.
Yeah,
They don't just get added
right.
ad hoc.
Yeah, I think my reason for bringing this to you all is that operationally, I think it wasn't really working at the start the way it was intended. And I just wanted to make that clear and then explain like what we're trying to do about that.
I mean, if we put out an RFP and nobody says they can do it within our normal timeline, then I could understand telling the applicant, if you have suggestions, we would consider, a failover to using a non-approved provider to keep the timeline.
Good point too, yeah.
Yeah,
But if anybody on the list replies and says that they can do it within our expected timeline, then I don't think we go with anybody ad hoc.
it should be a red flag if none of our vendors
Yeah,
can
actually
do it.
do it. That's,
there is a busy season though, right? Like,
There's
yeah,
right now.
yeah, I'm like January through.
Yeah,
That's like the busy season, so I could understand that being a problem.
right, and yeah, they're doing other things like wetland delineations, which, this time of year. So,
okay, so. I will leave it to you as what your next step should be, because I
Yeah.
don't see this as being, I don't know if the commission needs to vote or if we want to vote. But sounds like if you did go out for an RFQ and develop that list, you'd have our support.
that's my plan,
Okay.
once I have someone, once Hannah's here next week.
Yeah, once you're not in the front
Oh, there
desk.
you
more
go, that's
time.
a good idea.
But yes, that's
Okay.
the goal and, we have some larger projects, that may be coming in.
We have,
Like,
I mean, we have good
uh,
history, right? I mean, we know who did the assessments for all of the applications for the last 10 years, so
Yeah.
we should be able to just take that and
Right.
send it to them.
Yeah, I mean, RFQs, are a bit of a recruitment process in a way, so anyone that we've worked with and thought they were reputable
Mm.
gets it. Yeah. Was there more on the pricing or was that really the discussion?
There is, Gary,
Well, I just had a
Basically-
quick question related to the two quotes thing. I mean, what happens if you as a landowner submit a request from everybody on the list, for example, but only one comes back that's able to do it? Is the town gonna squawk at that, the fact that they only get one quote?
we're required to get 2 quotes for our purchasing policy.
That could be problematic. I could see if we have a list of 6, there's only one that currently has a window in their schedule that would allow them to do it. Whereas the other ones could be booked out for 6 months, and not be able to do it.
That's a really good point, Gary. I would encourage you, Andrew, to think about that as part of that pre-qualification process. Like, is it possible, there might be flexibility in the town's purchasing plan that if you have an approved list, that if only one of as long as a bid comes in from the approved list,
Mhm.
it can proceed. I don't know if that's
Right.
the case or not, but like,
I should look back to our purchasing policy because I know we're required to reach out to a certain number of contractors.
yeah,
Um. If they come back with a quote and a timeline that's infeasible. I need to check if that's still, if that qualifies, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
Like, we could do it, but we couldn't do it until fall, and we're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
we
Right.
at least got your bid, but we're not
right,
gonna go with it.
right,
Right.
totally.
Yeah.
So the other thing with pricing, basically. This is once again operational, but we've gotten some complaints about the fixed rate pricing, just that it's expensive, and the message I got from you all last time is that, well, the intent is that it's done correctly, and that is an expense of doing these projects. As far as setting up how that fee is structured, there's the option of having the contractor provide a fixed rate price. Or we could look at what Public Works does with their engineering fees, and basically they have thresholds depending on how large your project is. And there's a flat rate that you pay, and so an example is, I think for smaller subdivisions, you pay $5,000. And then anything that the Public Works Department needs assistance on for review for engineering, they will pay someone to do that out of that account. For a small subdivision, it probably won't go up to that $5,000 cap. But, and then, once they're done, the rest of the money is returned to the applicant. So. It's a bit of a.
Okay, so you collect the larger-ish amount,
Mhm.
and then if the services come in below that, then you return whatever's left in escrow.
Basically the same, and if it was appropriate, I think. Asking what would work better for contractors too, I don't really know. I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but I did get that one piece of feedback that was like, hey, it's really hard to provide a fixed rate.
Mhm.
I don't know until I get there, how long it's gonna take. How many bids it's gonna take.
Yeah, and with the engineering fees, I think you run the risk of. Let's say the cap is $5,000, what if they go above that?
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah.
I'm leaning towards fixed rate anyway, but it's
Yeah.
just, it's a complexity there, so.
Go ahead, Reed.
I have a question about. So I'm, in my line of business, we do t-shirt sizing all the time, just like small, medium, large, we're not gonna get like. Specific numbers, we just go like, is this a small project, a medium project, or a large project, and that helps move past things quickly. But could we actually do that with like acreage? Is it reasonable to say that something that is, let's say, 2 acres or less compared to something that's 2 acres to 5 acres? And something that's more than 5 acres, that we really can say the effort and likely cost is proportionate to the acreage? Or have you gotten any feedback from them on whether it's like, no, some are small but really complex, where others are huge, but it's a giant field?
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't really.
Right, an old growth forest is not gonna be the
Right.
same process as a farmer's field.
Quality of the,
Mhm. That's a good question,
or the substance of the property, okay.
if that makes sense to me, the way you're saying it. In practice, I don't know if there would be,
If you can find a contractor who's actually gonna show up and do work at a fixed rate, I mean, props to you. I don't think, personally, my experience is that they're not gonna show up.
It's too risky.
Yeah, it's too risky for them, right?
Or you get like, they're only gonna do so much work regardless of how complex the property is.
Exactly.
Because the,
It's like, oh, well, that's my time.
and so, yeah, I think, like, back to the reason why we're talking about this, I think this is operational on our side, but you all are. Experienced and experts kind of in the field in your own
Yeah.
different ways, and so, like, that feedback is, yeah, it's helpful. And
The escrow process you described makes sense to me, as far as asking an applicant for either, creating some kind of standard like 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 escrow. You get it back if it's not fully utilized.
Mhm.
That process makes a lot of sense, but I just don't think you're gonna get a contractor to bid in on like that chunk of expense. That's my guess.
Mhm.
You know, is that, but it sounds like that's the feedback you're hearing from the contractors as well.
Yes, and I think that the fixed rate is going to be higher.
Yeah, as a result, because
Because,
it bakes in the risk that, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So do you think you'll get pushback from people who have to pay that fee? I mean, person at Knoxville would be like, are you kidding me? I have to, get that money together.
Right, so that's an example of, yeah, say we ask them for $5,000, their HDA might be under 2,000.
They're
Mhm.
basically loaning us $3,000, they're not gonna like that at all.
They're not, no.
Yeah, no one wants to loan the town. I mean, it could be solved by just by having the RFP specify estimates. Right, and then you could just put an adder in.
Put a risk add on, say, okay,
Right.
they said they estimated 3K, we're gonna collect 4K. And that way we're protected just in case it goes over.
Yeah, because you're not gonna get the applicant to write another check if the HDA goes $50 over. The way that could work in an RFP is that you're asking for time, availability, estimated number of hours. What are the things?
These days, they can just look at Google Earth. And be like,
Exactly.
okay, it's mostly forested, or
Yeah.
Okay, the streams in the area, like they're gonna be able to
Right.
tell.
It's
Without
probably,
even visiting.
that image is probably gonna be in an RFP.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do have the, other map constraints, specific like natural communities that might be mapped on that parcel that I think plays some role.
The reason we asked for HGA,
Yeah.
is gonna be the overlays. But, yeah, I don't know what the right answer is.
Well, as long as you have the right answer is a consistent one.
Yeah.
Like, that's really what it comes down to, is you can't move the target, right? You gotta have a consistent process. So if if we're moving into a realm of a half dozen qualified vendors, and then they give you a price in response to the RFP, seems to me like, as long as you have a consistent 10% or 20% adder to that price, as being, this is what's gonna go into escrow. It doesn't need to be by like the small, medium, large subdivision. It could just be a consistent policy that says.
Proposal plus X%
Exactly,
for risk.
right. That will lead to some strange asymmetries in the bidding estimates, is my guess, is because then they'll know that the town is gonna add 10% to the escrow account, and so they might reduce their cost by 10% as a result, but that gets into contract game theory stuff. I don't know if our biologists are that sophisticated.
I would hope they'd be more focused on whether they can do the job.
Yeah, I would hope so too, but I deal with some pretty interesting contractors. Okay, I want to talk about the timeline because that was so do you need anything more from us on pricing?
No, I think I'll probably discuss it with Matt next. We've talked a little bit about it, and if we change it, I'll let you know.
Okay.
But yeah, that's helpful feedback.
So then the other question that you had at the start of this discussion was order of operations going to the DRB.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little bit more thoroughly?
Yeah, and I don't want you to get too, once again, I know we're kind of in the weeds already. So,
Yeah, we're definitely in the weeds.
This topic is like in the weeds only, it's just,
Well, yeah, I mean.
if it was easy, it would be done already, but we're trying to fix something that's complex.
So there's that discussion, basically, once the discretionary permit is filed, it's filed with the HDA. And ideally, the way you set it up, the applicant has made any changes that are recommended in that HDA on their site plan. if they haven't done that, there is the strong recommendation that you can make to the development review board that they need to make that change. I don't know if there's anything really to change there, but I just wanted to know if from your experience, any comments on that? If you're happy with where that's at. I don't really know if it's realistic that we could have like a second plan that comes to the Conservation Commission, and I'm hesitant to do that based on, like I said, those shot clocks that we're putting on the applicant. You know, if you have to come to, you already have to come to a many meetings, but just,
Well, Reed, you already said that none of these HDAs have come back to say you got the house in the wrong place.
Yeah, it's been like minor tweaks, like, so for instance, Nob Hill. Was one of the first times, and that was one of the first ones where the town did the contracting, where. She was like, well, driveway really should move it over, and he actually already had moved it over.
right,
Prior to her coming with her draft report, because they had a conversation and she said, look, your driveway is going through a sensitive wet area. Could that be adjusted? And he said, sure, adjusted it, so. To me, that was kind of a success already, the fact that we had a biologist come and walk through the report and answer questions was a success. Although it was a draft report and we got a little bit, I think, too much into giving feedback to the biologist on the draft report. But the fact that we got to see a report early and that something was actually changed on a map as a result of the biologist's visit, to me was a success. Sorry, not forgot your question.
The question
Yeah.
if he
Timing,
had,
so I would not be in favor, Terry, I know you, and Gary, I'm interested in what you guys think as well. I know in the room we've been talking a lot, but, I would not be in favor of asking them to come back any additional times to look at draft plans beyond the initial conversation at which we talked to them about the reasons why we would be requiring an HDA and what they would be looking at. And then the discretionary permit visit where we are hearing the HDA results and comparing those to the current version of the plans. At that point, I feel like it's between the applicant and the DRB. If we're making recommendations, we cannot force them to do things, but we can tell them. We can make very, very strong recommendations, and I think if we have contracted the biologist and the RFP. Was very clear in what we're asking them to do, and if we then can draw a line between. We asked for this, the biologist said this, therefore we're recommending the DRB not approve any plans unless it meets this. I feel like that's as strong as you can be, given the fact that we're an advisory board committee. That's my
Great.
position.
Yeah, I just had one comment on that. I'm trying to think of something that might be helpful to the proposed developer of the land. Would it be appropriate for us to see the draft and then just in a meeting in a short period of time, comment on it, say, here's what we would suggest to alleviate these issues in the report, and then just give it back to them and have them consider those before they come in the final time to us or before they go to the DRB? I just throw that out. It'd be something we could probably in 10 minutes glance through the first report.
Yeah, I think that's good.
I think that's a good idea, and I think in the past, that's really what Andrew's role has done, is like the coaching of the applicant to say, hey,
Yeah.
when this comes to the WCC for discretionary review, they're gonna be expecting, since the report is talking about this issue, that you've done something to remediate that issue. So to me, that's the staff role. When the draft
Yeah, I think
to
that
talk
having
about
some
it.
input from our way of thinking
That way
prior
they
to their
don't come and
decision
get
making.
surprised.
Yeah.
right.
I think that's a good point. If we did not have staff,
We would have to
we would be,
provide feedback.
right, and thankfully, we have staff.
So the draft report is gonna come to you and it's gonna come to the applicant, and then I assume there's gonna be some conversation about, okay, now that this is in, when are you ready for discretionary permit? And part of that conversation is, by the way, did you notice the HDA recommended, had concerns about this and this? that's what the WCC is gonna be expecting you
Yeah.
to speak to at the discretionary permit meeting.
Mhm.
So you might wanna make your changes before that
Yeah.
rather than having to scramble after.
It does seem like if you have an applicant who's unwilling to accept the recommendations of the assessment, then that should be made known to us that they are not going to change their plan. And that we should have that opportunity to comment to the DRB in the way that
Mhm.
Reed was just describing, is that, you know, we've heard the applicant's complaint. We recommend that it follow the HDA and let the DRB sort of make that final call. Where it makes sense. Any further discussion on this? Anything needed from us, Andrew?
No, I appreciate your feedback and, yeah, relatively new process for me as well, so it's nice to talk through with you all.
Yeah.
Some of you have been here for quite a while, doing these and so it's helpful.
Great.
I have one other comment about the process, but not about pricing or timeline. And that was kind of related to your question, Gary, about what goes into the RFP, what are the things we're asking for? I was wondering whether there's any additional background, whether we should have like an FAQ or a one pager that accompanies that, that's not the requirements for the report, but rather some context about what's going on in Williston. So like, what is Williston as a town focused on? Things like what are our goals in the town plan related to habitat and conservation? What are kind of like our priorities as a town? It's not to say that you need to address these things in the report, but it might help a biologist understand like, okay, the town, you know, currently due to our zoning, we've got a lot of conserved land in these areas, we have less in these areas. I don't know if that's what others think, whether that would be kind of like overstepping to say things that are not part of the bylaw to the biologist, but
Hmm.
Comments?
now that I say it, I kind of think it's too much. And it should really just be whatever's in the bylaw,
Yeah, the biologist probably knows too.
hopefully.
I think what you're
Yeah.
talking about a bit is, maybe consistent with some of our conversation at the last meeting, which was about having this clear communication to the applicant and the biologist, like why we're here, why we're doing this,
Mhm.
what our goals are.
Maybe it's just a paragraph that on the RFP that says, you know, this is why the town is contracting services. This is the town's priorities. Here's what's required in the report.
I mean, I think what you're getting at too, though, could be an interesting perspective to add to did we just lose our video?
Yeah.
Can you guys see us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see. Yep.
It just
Yeah.
came back. Let's say we had a applicant close to Sucker Brook Trail or a protected corridor area. We wouldn't necessarily, if we got an HDA that was just looking at the little culvert crossing, you know, and like didn't sort of take the larger like landscape view into perspective to say like, oh, well, there's, you know, this big preserve, you know, adjacent to the property, that it would be nice if like, you know, the house weren't located, you know, between A and B, because then it would sort of create a contiguous, you know, connector path or something. I mean, I mean, landscape level planning can be provided for context, right? But I think that's in like the opening paragraph of an RFP is this property is on, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 Sucker Brook Lane. It's, you know, within a contiguous zone of the,
That's WHA and
yeah. And it's bordered by, you know, 50,000 acres of protected habitat.
that would go, actually, do you just, maybe that's already solved for, does the staff report from the preliminary application, what's the first
Pre-app.
Pre-app, does the staff report from the pre-app get provided to the provider for the HDA?
Not specifically, it could be,
That might be something to solve that, because the staff report explains why we ended up asking for an HDA, which is usually that landscape level thing, like, okay, our SWHA map includes some of this parcel. There's stuff going on in neighboring parcels, all that background is kind of in there.
wildlife corridor, or
Yeah,
habitat, yeah.
so that would be the suggestion I would have, is that the staff report from pre-app being provided to the biologist.
It seems like a good practice, sure.
Mhm.
Doesn't require creating any additional
Yeah.
documentation.
Thinking back, I think we actually do share that as a like, hey, this is the project.
Yeah.
Give the
Yeah,
background,
it's just an attachment to the RFP, honestly.
Mhm.
Right,
it's
but
like an appendix.
Right.
Cool.
All right, that was really productive and we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule. And from one thing to the next, one complicated thing to the next, I mean, is Williston 2050 webpage. Andrew, I believe your suggestion, or I guess in this agenda topic, was to bring us up to speed on where
Mhm.
staff is with the development of that 2050 plan and what input you would like to start getting from us.
Mhm. Yeah, so this is an introduction. Let me share my screen again. So staff and the planning commission have been working on. Sorry, let me get this first, do two things at once. So. Staff and the planning commission have been working together on drafting, this says draft chapters. There's a bit of. Crossover, shared language, whether or not we're saying chapters or topic areas.
Mhm.
But basically, we've separated the plan out into a bunch of different topics. That are then split into different groups. And each group has a staff lead along with two planning commission members that are helping to work on it. And the idea is that we're drafting these topics, what we think is important. And I'll go into detail in a second on what that looks like. For each of those topics. So my group has been mostly focused on things that would be appropriate for you all to be included on, which is intentional. But there are all different topics and basically I want you all to be aware that these are up and posted. It's on the Williston 2050 website, and there is a form here at the bottom that you can provide feedback generally. That said, I'm looking for more detailed feedback for those who are interested in being involved in on the Conservation Commission. And so let me go into one of these chapters. So our first topic was land use, rural lands and subdivision design. And so we're looking at a pretty narrow scope, but land use in our rural zoning district for the most part, and subdivision design in those areas. And so the general layout for these, as we've conceived them, have been an introduction that kind of talks about history and recent developments, what's going on. And then we're talking about our livable, resilient, and equitable, which are the three kind of core things we've been talking about in light of the town plan of how the plan and our goals achieve those three. And so you can see we've got a bit of an outline right now. Some groups have more writing. My group has more of an outline for some of these sections.
Did you get Matt to move on that Thursday deadline?
We're still on the rough Thursday deadline, which is just fine. It's technically a Friday deadline because that's when it goes to the planning commission.
I see.
He's pretty good about that, but so we're working on these chapters and, basically, some of them are rougher than others. But the idea is to have something written down. To then, pull everything together and look at what we have,
Mhm.
and then really. Decide, okay, how are we going to separate these different areas into chapters? And what needs to be written, what's good, what needs more work? And so I'll just scroll. Down, so we have our public engagement section. From our public engagement, we've kind of pulled some quotes, some statistics. And then we get into the meat of the plan, which is really setting out exactly what the goals are for the upcoming plan. And we separated it out into this hierarchy of goals, objectives, strategies, and actions. And I'm actually gonna backpedal a little bit here. Let me share. We have a little graphic that we've been using.
Like a schematic of objectives versus strategies versus actions.
Exactly, yeah. Let's see. So we have this, I'll just let you read that. I won't read it word for word. All right, choose. Center it.
This is fun. So this is going into all four of those, like, this is what you guys are asking yourselves.
For each topic area, having these different levels for, you have an idea of something that should be part of this upcoming plan. And we're looking at where that idea fits into. Is it part of a broader goal that needs to be stated as well? Or if you have a broad goal, moving down into what are the actions we need to take to actually achieve that goal?
Yeah, so the objective one is sort of like, how do we know, how will we know whether we're achieving that goal?
Right.
What's like a dimension of it that we can measure?
Yeah.
Or observe.
And if you go through the chapters, you'll see there's some different kind of approaches between groups on how exactly to structure this. Sometimes there's some crossover, I think, between objectives and goals and objectives and strategies. And that's something I think we're gonna clean up. But the idea right now is to get everything down on paper. So, and the other thing I'll say is just that, you can see down here, there's a idea that we're trying to ban the verb consider.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's
And
banned.
to have,
Yeah.
That's Matt language right there.
it is.
It's banned.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, so we're looking at specific steps to take, and usually that looks like stating exactly who is taking that step, who is doing that action, and what is
Yeah,
it.
I can appreciate that after reading hundreds of these comments come in and probably seeing the word consider in well over half of them. It would get to be pretty grating on you. The considered is like very broad.
Right, and I think
Appreciate it.
historically too, town plans have kind of had this. That consider language,
Yeah.
it's like, great, we considered it, we're not interested.
Right.
Yeah, it's like lip service rather than action.
Right.
To do something about it, yeah.
Right.
And so you can see we're switching back to this topic one, rural land use and subdivision design. We have goals leading into objectives. So an example of an objective, stop and contain sprawl of residential development in rural Williston. And so the strategy for that, focused development in the growth center while continuing to require low residential density, and protected open space.
So that's the roadmap.
A bit of kind of keeping on as we are. But then there are actions related to that I think, kind of. Well, they're specific to you and the planning commission, looking at. The thresholds for that, and as this plan develops, it's 8 years starting in 2025. Are there changes that you'll want to make to that? Are we still happy with the way things are happening in rural Williston? There's questions of permanent conservation, which we've talked about recently. We have these open space parcels that are protected technically under the bylaw. They're pretty hard to conserve given their size, but that's something that we want to be aware of and calling it out in the town plan. I think it's important. So some different actions and strategies, and I'm not sure if anyone's had time to read through these.
No.
If you're interested and you want to be involved, that's great. I think the other thing I wanted to discuss is just how we should do feedback. And my idea is that these are SharePoint files. They're basically Word documents. So if you have Word, you can open them up or you can see them on the browser.
Would you ask them to use comments?
That's my thought, is to have a commenting function extended to you all. You can comment on really anything and everything that's in there, anything that's not in there. You all, once again, are the experts. You're experienced, and
Keep telling us that.
I will. But we have 3 heads for the most part, me and 2 planning commission members working on this. Frankly, relatively limited time. These aren't
Is it
where.
this Friday that you're trying to have?
We just actually talked about this second conservation chapter last night with the planning commission, and there were a number of things that I'm gonna go back in and add. But comments about what you think should be included are really helpful. These are very broad topics. And there's some kind of deciding of, where different goals should be placed in the plan, but that's not really what we're worried about right now. It's more just getting things on the page and what needs to be included. And so that feedback would be much appreciated. I understand it's a lot. And so I don't expect everyone to be spending all their free time. But
Go ahead, Reed.
We did the Google form feedback with Simon, just before he left. We were going through and reading like a section and giving feedback. Are you going through that, like what we expect to be in there and our reactions to what was in there? And then like, as things get into here, are you like checking it off saying, okay, that has somehow translated into a goal, an objective, a strategy, or an action?
I've used some of that. I haven't done a comprehensive read through yet.
Because I hesitate a little bit to come in and comment here.
Yeah.
If we can first check against that list, because we spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I feel like I was more clear-minded about it, looking at the prompts that Simon gave us and responding to them more so than I would be looking at this and then trying to remember, oh yeah, what did we talk about?
Yeah, I mean, Simon had we talked about it as a group as to how we would want to proceed, and we erred on that sort of curated experience because we knew that the staff would have this job ahead of itself. And Simon was interested in getting our feedback on very particular questions and very particular sections of the plan. Now we know that we're basically rewriting it from scratch, right? Like that's pretty much, so a little bit of what Simon did for us won't really work in that context because they are sort of rewriting it. But I do think that some of the key takeaways from those sections what we're driving the intent of doing that,
Right.
right? Is like, we would pull sections from the town plan and say, is this still relevant? Would we still word it the same way? Would we change specific wording of it? So I think going back to that is super valuable.
I will also read it, to be clear,
Yeah.
I'll read it and comment, I hesitate that maybe my comment wouldn't be as poignant.
Right.
Just reading this and writing it as maybe what we talked about when we were deep in each topic.
I think this could be useful for like a red flag review, where like if I were reading it and I saw something that was like, oh, that doesn't jive with what we talked about. That might jog my memory. Candidly, that this type of document review is really hard to see where things are missing.
Mhm.
Because it's just out of sight, out of mind, but it's possible that like missing elements can certainly sort of like show up here, especially since it's in an outline form. So, I'm willing to give it a go if that's what, if that's what the staff and the planning commission are sort of asking the committees for. It seems like we got a pretty curated experience the last time. I just don't know how to marry those two things, just to make sure that like is my comment gonna be consistent with what I said in that discussion back in December,
So I guess I think I would offer, we made this publicly available. So that anyone can comment. That doesn't mean that we necessarily have to go into it right now, and I think another option from what you're saying, Dave, could be, once we have our 5 topic areas, I believe it's 5, posted, we could have a consistent, okay, we're gonna go through 2, maybe, in between meetings, and, if you just wanna give comments, that would be great, we can discuss them at a meeting, or we don't really need to. But wait basically until we have all of them together and they're a little bit more comprehensive. Like, for example, conservation areas, we got a bunch of feedback last night that I plan on adding. And so, and what it sounds like from what you said, Dave, is that you want it to be, and Reed too, actually, like pretty close to where we need it to be, and then we have you go back in and take a look, but.
Yeah. It's a suggestion, I don't
Right,
know if it's
yeah.
the preferred suggestion, but it's one way of going about it.
Right.
What are some people's thoughts? How much time do we want? I think the question is, how much time do we really want to put into like the early stage outlines?
Is it this Friday that you're trying to have something?
No, I'm. The next topic is working landscapes, and we'd be
Yeah.
looking at the next planning commission meeting, which is in a couple
So you're developing these outlines, like,
Yeah.
So
and you're not going back to land use right now, other than, I guess you said you're gonna add some stuff after talking to.
Okay. Yeah, so for 1 and 2.
Right. I gotta think that that's the type of thing, like. I would love to have input on the outline. Like, I definitely know that I would love to have input on the outline. I don't really know that I need you to be done working on watershed health in order to talk to you about land use, rural lands and subdivision. Side, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know, I would err on the side of like, let's walk through these outlines and make, if anyone has any recollection of the conversations as either collectively or individually. I'd love to have input on the outline, I guess is where I would say, I don't need a comprehensive review.
Okay.
Other people's thoughts on
That
that?
makes sense to me, yeah.
We could do it similar to what we did with Simon reviewing the last town plan, where like for the next meeting, we could all read 1 and 2.
Right,
Put comments in the document, and then at the meeting, we could do a quick review and have a chance to ask you questions about like, what was the group thinking when they wrote this, or why did they phrase it that way?
How did it look to get feedback from the planning commission last night?
relatively haphazard.
Okay.
It's comments on, hey, I think this is missing, or an example with our conservation areas. We were talking about the different types of conservation and, what the intent of conserved lands are. And so it kind of gets into this management plan, level. You know, what is our intent for this piece of land? But then also the broader kind of, what are the town's intentions with conserving land, and do we want to have a statement about that? And so there was some feedback on, you know, having it at both levels. Which isn't in there right now. And so things like that, where it's a, you know, I think that it's important to. Someone saying that they think it's important to state something at a different place or a different level, or state it more clearly.
I think that the idea of a SharePoint. Where all of us would have the ability to, I mean, that's how the professional world works right now, is that. Everybody's in the same document and reviewing the same stuff,
Right.
and there's an opportunity for us to see. Reed or Terry or Laura's comments as we comment ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think that could be really helpful as like a meeting kind of exercise, and it would probably feel less haphazard. For what that process is,
Mhm.
because haphazard's not good. That just means one commissioner is opening the link, read it, no one else in the meeting did, and you've got like.
Yeah, I guess it's more just based on the layout of it, you know, you might have some comments on different sections, and we're trying to methodically work through.
Yep.
But as the conversation just starts, oh, we should have this over here as well, and
Ooh.
it's helpful
Okay.
feedback.
Yeah.
But it's, I think. Maybe a little bit of the nature of what we're working on.
29% of respondents thought that conservation should be the town's #1 priority in energy efficiency and environmental conservation category.
Which is wild, because the town has nothing to do with energy efficiency.
Well, the energy committee is working on that, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like clean heat standard stuff.
Another big comment in there on the conservation one is the number of people who strongly agree with. Their taxes increasing if it means more conserved land. There was strong support for that, and
Yeah, it says people value the preservation of forests and meadows and protection of wildlife habitat in Williston's open spaces and undeveloped areas. And 60% of people think Williston should fund and support increased conservation of undeveloped land, even if it means an increase in taxes. Wow. But
Not exactly polling results, but it's among respondents,
Among
that's a good
respondents,
number.
yeah.
Mhm.
among the engaged,
Among the engaged, exactly, right, not a poll, but a result nonetheless.
interesting.
So is there anything that we wanna, so we have 15 minutes for this agenda. Full disclosure, I have a meeting at 9 that I need to get back home for, so I would love to be able to get out of here at 8:55. So we don't have to take the full 15 minutes on this, but I do want to get a clear process as far as like what our next steps would be, and you know, should we all anticipate doing a little bit of a less curated but sort of SharePoint level deep dive into like section 1, for example?
I'm not sure I'm. Not gonna give you homework quite yet, I don't think.
Okay.
I'm gonna set up, I think if you guys agree, which it sounds like you do, try to set up the SharePoint. And have those available, and if you wanna be, you know, if you have time and you wanna read through, these are living documents that. We're going to continue working on them, I'll be in here making changes. So basically. If you wanna get ahead, you can, and just read through what we have, but I think maybe. At the next meeting, we have a little bit of a like, okay, here's our plan, you all have access, we figured out any problems with that. Let's look at 1 and 2 or so on.
How, I guess the only remaining question for me then is, how do we combine those? The Google form feedback that we were giving to Simon in the winter with this next step, like how do we? not necessarily, you know, not with like an eye over your shoulder, but
Mhm.
like, what is the way to sort of assure some continuity between the feedback then and what we're talking about now? We had a lot of discussions and I don't
Yeah.
remember half of them.
That's a good question. I know where I've seen the results of those Google Forms. I've used them a bit looking at the chapters and I don't think I was quite aware of how in-depth they are and so I will go back and be adding based on those. We could add them to the SharePoint folder as a like, hey, this is
Oh,
something too, and I can make that available to our planning commission members.
yeah,
And
I felt like it was maybe too detailed for the planning commission members to look at.
okay,
Just in my opinion, I feel like, you interpreting them.
yeah,
I think what you guys have in there, but just skimming it, is probably like 75% aligned with what was in our comments, but there might be some nuggets in there that's like, oh, that didn't come up when we discussed it with Shayla and Chapin, so let's bring that up to them at our next check-in.
right, and that's the goal, and Dave, I think it's a good question of like, how do we make sure that that's all in there?
I would love to see the results, if you're able to put them in a shared drive with these documents to review, that would be ideal from my perspective.
I will give you a for example,
Mhm.
which
Sure.
is that when I was submitting my survey at home as a private citizen, I was thinking about the things that I think about as a private citizen, which is, you know, vehicles, pathways, access, that type of stuff. But the conversations we had here were very specific around the Conservation Commission's oversight and responsibility. And when we strayed into things of personal interest, and it wasn't my sort of strain alone, but like Simon was very quick to bring us back to like, okay, but I want the feedback from the commission. So like, that's why I think those Google Forms should be interpreted by you as just another set of public comments, essentially. Comments from the commission as far as like the scope and overview. But like I would say pretty much equal to whatever the other comments that you all worked through and clearly were plucking from to sort of set the tone of this initial draft.
That makes sense.
And then as long as we have access to those Google Forms in our review,
Mhm.
and if you could like recommend that, oh, this section of the Google form looks like it's consistent with like this new chapter. But maybe there's probably gonna be like multiple of those forms, so it's gonna be a bit of a puzzle.
Right, and we could have some discussion points, some flagged areas that it's like, hey, this is something that. A couple of people brought up, we might wanna revisit it,
Yeah,
yeah. That's
Great.
helpful,
Sorry to give you more work, but I think it's actually less work, like it's
Don't
more work in the
apologize.
short, it's like the more work in the short term. But it means that when we review it, our review will be more valuable because most stuff will already be taken care of, and we can focus on the things that aren't quite
yeah,
aligned with our
right,
conversation.
it's the way to fill in the gaps with things that we would forget that we're missing.
and that's what I'm hoping for, is
Okay.
having you involved, so that's great.
Okay, great.
I think you're gonna find them pretty rich. If you haven't read them in detail, like, we had good conversations
Yeah.
every time about how things have changed.
And I mean, the Google Forms were the sort of pre-evening assignments that we tried to do. But it was also the conversation around each one of those that, you know, which would be reflected in the minutes and, you know. Yeah. So they're rich. But the form is really only the starting point, honestly. Okay, great. 8:32 and we're on to other business.
You mind, I'm just gonna run to the bathroom
Yeah,
really quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Terry, you sent a note earlier, around your, so the other business, first thing up is the vote for the treasurer. And I believe you sent a note, but I apologize. I saw it come in, but I didn't have a chance to read it.
No problem. So what I asked is, I've had some things come up. So I read earlier that Gary was willing to take over the role as treasurer. And if that was possible, I'd really appreciate that. It's, like I said, it's really in name only because Shirley Goodell Lackey pretty much does everything. And all I really was doing was asking Shirley for the balance, the report every August from the vote at town meeting. And that's when the money from the town budget gets put into the ERF. Really, that's pretty much the whole role, unless there's, donations that come in, but that's pretty rare. I haven't really seen that, so.
Or meeting revenues, that kind of stuff.
Right, and I really didn't even, this whole thing about the interest and putting things into bonds and things. I wasn't even really a part of that, and the only way I knew about it was on the agenda. That I was like, oh, wow, really? That's great. So really, Gary, there's not a whole lot except once a year.
Paying attention, right? Somebody's got to be paying attention.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be paying attention.
Yeah, I assume you keep track of at least the WCC budget itself and where we put our resources, or how does that work?
Right, that was pretty much Simon. Simon really kept track of the operating budget that we had.
I mean, it might pay to, maybe every once in a while we just look at it, or at least at the beginning of the year, say, here's where we're at, here are the resources we have, and Andrew can work on, using them under our direction, I guess you could say. Yeah. And
there's a capital improvement budget, which is for like infrastructure of the trails and things. But pretty much Simon, really managed that. And we did meet with Shirley one time, and she sat down and she really, Simon didn't really understand it as well as I. And she really sat down. So it might be worth it for you and Andrew, since Andrew's new. And just to sit down with Shirley, and she was really good about explaining, how that works. And I think, the budget for the Conservation Commission is pretty minimal. For operating budget, it's $1,000 maybe or whatnot. And, I think Simon bought the backpack sprayer and some things like that, a shovel for the parsnip. And so he was kind of on top of that. So.
Yes, I'm more than willing to do that.
Thank you.
I might ask for some ideas from you occasionally, Terry, so I know more of the history.
Sure. Yeah. And
well, thank you for your volunteering, Gary, and I'm glad Terry's description didn't scare you away there.
Yes, and it's nice that Terry's still here, so I can go to her with questions.
That's right.
Yes,
Terry, you've done an amazing job filling in for Carl. You bring it up, right? You bring it up and mention the budget stuff periodically throughout the year, which has meant that we feel like we know what's going on. Otherwise, we'd forget to check. So
right. So so it's good to just check in with what's happening. But pretty much and I don't know for this year, because there was a revote, whether that means that the money won't go into the account till after August. So that's maybe a question for Shirley, but it's just an email to Shirley and say, what's the balance on the ERF fund?
So Andrew, we'll plan on, after August hits and we know what our budget is, at least you and I sitting down, if not with Shirley as well, to understand what we can do with the money and how much we have.
Right. And she was great. She was really helpful on kind of teaching, leading Simon and I through how it worked. So great. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll move that we elect Gary as treasurer beginning July 1st. Is that the terms? Beginning July 1st, 2024, for a term of 1 year.
All right, we have a motion.
I'll second.
Our seconds. Thank you, Laura. Vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Any abstentions? I think that was unanimous. Thank you so much, Gary. And thank you,
I feel
Terry.
so proud.
Thanks.
Yes.
And now that you've officially been elected, I think we should talk about spokesperson responsibilities for the ERF request to Select board.
Oh, dear.
Oh, boy.
Sorry,
That's a
Gary.
chair thing, yeah.
Yeah, I know. As the incoming chair, I think it's time we talk about spokesperson responsibilities. All right, great. So that's it for other business that on the agenda other than upcoming meetings.
Yeah, and upcoming meetings, I would like to, just quickly, so June 19th is our next meeting. We talked about having some conversations about ERF outreach. I'm excited about that, and I'm actually hoping to have some discussion at the, Champlain Valley Conservation Partnership meeting it's today.
Okay.
We have an open agenda, and so I was told to bring some topics of what's going on, and I think hopefully we'll get some feedback. CDU student projects, we'll follow it up with Stan. I'll probably follow up with him again, see if he has any feedback on our list. And then we'll have maybe some more instructions, what we will, on town plan, and I'll likely be assigning you homework, so that's good fun. July 3rd. I was not planning on being here that day. We have those conflicts from time to time. We get staff coverage if needed, but I wanted to ask just of everybody here, do you know if you'll have any conflicts? If we won't have a quorum, I just won't schedule a meeting.
I prefer not to be there as well.
I think that's, yes, I actually, I wanted to flag that, next Wednesday is Juneteenth, our great country's most recent, national holiday, and, my company is honoring that, and I will not be working on Juneteenth, and so, I do believe Eric was planning to be here. So, and my wife is not working either, so we might do something with kids, basically, so I might not be available next time.
It's good to know.
I would be remote on the 17th if I attended. I can attend July 3rd.
You mean the 19th?
19th?
Yeah, June 19th and.
Sorry, yes, June 19th. Yes, so June 19th, I can make it, but virtually. July 3rd, I'm available.
Okay. I would, yeah. Probably available on the 3rd, but I would say only meet if we have a time pressing issue. I don't think that we need to sort of just meet for meeting's sake.
Yeah, I have a house full.
So there you go.
That's 2 down, and we can check with Kim and Eric
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we have an application that comes in, we'll try to meet, but right now we don't have anything we're required to do.
Okay. Do we have any applications lined up for 2 weeks from now?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, pretty slow on the DRB agenda this time of year.
Wow.
Slowing down a little bit, I think, summer, but
All right.
interest rates too.
Interest rates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Boy, there's all
No one
kinds
wants to
of,
build or buy a house right now.
there's so many interesting articles out there right now about that. Okay.
The one other thing, just, and this is more long-term, but, well, so the energy committee is currently working on the energy plan. And there's some connection between their energy plan for, solar siting and having known constraints related to our bylaws. And so, Melinda and I were talking a little bit about the draft, SWHA bylaw amendments that we have. They're kind of been on a back burner.
SWHA.
Significant wildlife
Oh,
habitat area.
right.
So there are like different tier levels for core habitat and wildlife corridors, and basically. If those were enacted, they may be seen as a known constraint for like solar siting policy, and so. Basically, just an FYI, the energy committee is working on the energy plan. We may have a discussion about that in the future. That might be a joint meeting of some sort. Just wanted you to be aware that that's out there. So, yeah, I will keep you updated as I hear more.
Sorry, one comment if I may, Dave.
Yeah.
It's quick. There were some nice photos taken of the pollinator garden, planting activities. There's not a lot to see just yet in terms of the results. It takes many weeks for the flowers to actually grow up and start blooming. But if your busy schedule allows, Andrew, it'd be good to see if we could get a photo or two up on the Nemo May pollinator garden page on the website. Of the planting day, and then we could come back later this summer and add a photograph of the fruits of our labor.
That would be great. Yeah, if you wanna send me photos,
Yeah,
that would be
I will
awesome.
reach out to Colleen and see, make sure that we have permission, if there's any that have students in it, make sure there's permission for them to appear, so.
Any other commission reflections on Nomo May? I know my neighborhood seemed like it was pretty popular this year. I saw at least a couple dozen houses just let
Yeah,
it
I
all
saw
go.
that too, yeah.
Good.
Mhm.
How are the total numbers from the sign give outs at on the green, the fair,
Pretty low.
pretty low,
Um,
new?
Yeah, we
people,
didn't
pretty
have
low.
many new people. I think there were 3.
Okay.
But
But yeah, the people I talked to said I'm gonna go home and mow, actually.
That's
that's a good
a.
reminder.
Not the intended.
Oh, my God. Uh,
I had a big chunk of, just turf grass that I wasn't treating or anything like that, and it was definitely going wild. And I'm just gonna let it go. I mean, it's like I got tons of flowers back there and it looks nice, and we're gonna have a little pathway connecting our house with the neighbors, so if we need to like walk between them. But we're just gonna kind of see what it looks like, just gonna have like a farmer's field back there this year.
I think that's like generally the direction is like Noah May is like, it's like a way to get comfortable with thinking about. Maybe my lawn doesn't need to be as big, like reducing lawn, increasing in perennial gardens, those are really the long-term
Yeah,
big bang. Benefit, I think, compared to like just not mowing for a month. Really just gets you comfortable with the idea that your lawn doesn't always have to be at 3 inches from May 1st through the end of the year.
there's still plenty of people in my neighborhood who hate dandelions and have a ongoing
A
war,
vendetta, yeah,
but
I like dandelions,
I'm comfortable, I'm good with them.
anyway.
Yeah,
Insects like them.
yeah, exactly.
Our yard, actually, my dad, it's just a funny story, my dad mows around the daisies. So we had like a few daisies start coming up, about what, 10 years ago. And my dad mows around them in the spring and lets them bloom, and then once they're done blooming, then he mows them. And so they just expand every year, so now our lawn is like a quarter daisies in the spring, and he only mows like half the backyard. And half the side yard, and the rest is just daisies for May, it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
nice.
Mhm.
Okay, any other business?
No,
And I think we are adjourned. See
take
you
care,
all
everyone.
either
Thanks.
later this
Bye.
month or next.
Yes.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Terry.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.
Miss Gary, here we go. Thanks for sharing, David.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, it's like my warm up.